Hey guys, tonight we step onto a creaking wooden platform bathed in torchlight, the acrid scent of smoke curling around your nostrils as you peer down at a restless crowd. You probably won't survive this warm welcome, but don't worry. Everyone else has paid their admission in full. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments so we know where in the world you're about to witness this spectacle. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge forward, boots echoing on damp timber, and suddenly you're the town's executioner, an outsider both feared and needed. The crowd parts like a sea of ragged faces, their breath fogs in the night air, and distant crickets chirp as if scoring your entrance. You hoist your axe, its handle smooth from years of use, and feel the weight settle into your palm like a grim old friend. A mainstream fact, public executions in medieval Europe drew thousands of onlookers eager for justice, served with dramatic flair. Historians still argue whether the axe or the sword was more commonly used for beheadings, but here tonight it's definitely a broad axe perfect for a clean snap. Beyond the blade's steel, there's a fringe tidbit rumor holds that executioners often lived in quaint executioners' cottages outside the city walls, complete with a small morgue garden where they could grow medicinal herbs. It's macabre real estate, but the rent was cheap. Sensory detail floods your senses, the rough rope binding your own wrists. Wait, scratch, that's the next victim. You smooth the gnarled wood of the scaffold railing splinters, pricking your fingertips. The stench of sweat and unwashed wool coats assaults you, mixed with the briny tang of tears from the condemned. Meanwhile, furtive laughter rippled through the crowd. Someone jokes that the executioner's horse knows more mercy than you ever will. A light joke, but it lands like a stone in your stomach. You adjust the hood, hiding your face. Anonymity is your shield. Beneath your ears, ring with haggling vendors below, hawking gingerbread skulls on sticks and ale in chipped wooden mugs. Modern asides creep in your mind. Imagine executioner's ale as the latest craft brew with tasting notes of bitter regret and smoky oak. Another joke bubbles up. It goes down easier than the condemned's last gulp of water. The condemned, clad in threadbare tunic, shuffles forward, knees trembling. You give a nod, a ritual passed down through generations of headsmen. He kneels back, straight eyes fixed on a single lantern. You feel the crowd lean in. Even the owl, perched on the church spire, hushes its wings. Fringe lore insists that executioners once dabbled as surgeons between jobs, stitching wounds during plagues, but church sermons condemned such jack-of-all-trades as dabblers in forbidden arts. Yet this duality kept them indispensable in times of crisis. Your blade glints a sliver of midnight lightning. You salute the corpse-to-be. One more impulse in the grim ballet. A hush falls. Even the wind pauses. You raise the axe. You hear the soft creak of leather from your gloves, a comforting squeak in the silence. Historians still argue whether the condemned heard a final prayer whispered by the headsman. But tonight, there is only your steady breath. Then gravity takes over. Down comes the axe with a thunderous crack that rattles the scaffold beams. flesh and bone separate so cleanly you almost admire the craftsmanship, both yours and the blacksmith's. A light joke escapes. That's one way to cut through red tape. It lands soft, even as gasps rise around you. The head tumbles into the trough. The body crumples. Torches flare brighter, casting dancing shadows on cobblestones slick with blood. You wipe the blade on coarse sackcloth, pragmatic if unsentimental. You pocket a single wisp of hair as a keepsake. Fringe collectors once believed executioner's hair warded off evil spirits. Spoiler, it did nothing except itch. Another mainstream fact: executioners were paid a daily wage by the town council and often received bonuses for unusual executions, drowning, drawing, and quartering or burning at the stake. You tally your earnings, it barely covers tonight's ale. But hey, at least you'll sleep under a roof that isn't shared with rats. A third light joke drifts up. I'd say I'm killing it at this job, but that might be in poor taste. As the crowd disperses, the palpable relief and morbid thrill linger in the air. You ascend from the scaffold muscles, humming from the effort. Your hood drops, revealing eyes heavy with the weight of 1,000 witnessed deaths. The townsfolk retreat home, chattering about tomorrow's market and whether the butcher will have fresh venison. Meanwhile, you pack away your implements and slip into the night, swallowed by cobbled alleyways. You probably won't survive as the next headsman if you're squeamish. But then again, someone has to do it. You slip through a narrow archway, the echo of the scaffold's final crack still humming in your ears, and descend a spiral staircase carved from damp limestone. Torches sputter along the moss-clad walls, casting jittery shadows that dance like nervous spectators. The air grows cooler, tinged with the metallic tang of blood residue long scrubbed from rusted chains. Remember that keepsake hair strand you tucked away after the last execution? Leave it in your pocket. This chamber isn't ready for souvenirs. You trudge into the heart of the dungeon, your boots splashing through shallow puddles that glimmer in torchlight. Barrels of unguents and jars of curious powders line the stone benches, their contents labeled in fading Latin, constringentia nocens venenum, and an odd one scrawled in a tremor of ink, Draconis unguentum, or dragon salve, a fringe tidbit suggesting alchemical experiments beyond mere pain inducements. You might wonder if it actually contained any draconic essence, but historians still argue whether medieval torturers ever dabbled in true alchemy or relied on herbal concoctions and invasive gadgets alone. A mainstream fact by the 14th century, many European courts sanctioned torture to extract confessions with specialized chambers designed for maximum psychological impact and efficiency. You're the assistant to the chamber's master torturer, a title nobody advertises at banquets unless the banquet is your own humiliation. Your task is precise. Prepare the instruments, steady the rack, and ensure the prisoner arrives in the correct posture or face the master's wrath. It's the only workplace where you can call the job hands-on without a shred of irony. You move to a heavy oak table, scarred by countless blade nicks. On it lie iron instruments, thumb screws, the Judas cradle spike, and a vicious-looking pair of pincers. Each tool has its own ritual. The pincers require careful oiling with pig fat in the morning, which is perhaps the sole time of day when the chamber smells anything other than despair. In a modern aside, you imagine marketing dungeon spa complete with mud masks made from dungeon sludge and complimentary screams. Joke number 1, guaranteed to make you scream with delight, or agony your choice. The prisoner arrives in leg irons hunched and wide-eyed. You offer a stiff nod, mindful of the ritual. The master demands silence until the last chain is in place. You heft the tiresome leg cuffs so ironclad and heavy, you wonder if they were forged by dwarves. Fringed lore whispers that some assistants filed down spikes on the racks overnight, selling the bits to black market bone collectors. Romantic in a morbid sort of way, but likely just gossip among drunken guards in the guard room. You guide the prisoner onto the rack, adjusting his arms above his head, feet secured by leather straps. His foul-smelling tunic clings to his back, soaked with sweat and fear. You glance at your own cuffed wrists, figment of your imagination, thankfully. The rack's rollers align beneath your hands. You brush off a speck of rust that looks suspiciously like old blood. Light. Joke number 2. Let's just roll with it, shall we? As you twist the handle to test its resistance, the gears creak and the prisoner's joints protest. You pause, recalling a mainstream fact. The rack became widespread in France and England by the late 15th century, prized by inquisitors for its ability to stretch sinews and break will without immediate fatality. You steel yourself, though your palms itch with adrenaline and regret. Modern gloves would be nice, but those weren't invented until centuries later. Historians still argue whether assistants ever suffered permanent injuries from the primitive cog work. But you're safe, mostly. The master torturer arrives, a looming figure in soot-dark robes, his hood shading a face half hidden by shadow and scars. He inspects the setup with the eye of a craftsman. Each cog and crank must be as calibrated as a sundial. You step back, heart hammering, as he grips the handle and slowly begins to turn. You watch the prisoner's sinews stretch, taut ribs creaking like warped floorboards. You lift your torch higher, illuminating every rivet and joint in the rack's frame. A quivering moan shatters the silence echoing off the damp walls. You can't help but wince at the grotesque symphony. The prisoner's scream spikes, and you lean in, scanning for broken bones or slippage in the leather straps. Fringe tidbit, some assistants kept a ledger coded, of course, tracking each victim's pain threshold, selling the data to traveling inquisitors for a pittance. You doubt your master would buy that, but the rumors swirl. You steady yourself on a low stone bench, hands braced against the cold. Around you, the torches sputter as if recoiling from the screams. Modern asides float through your thoughts. Imagine calling this team Building with mandatory trust falls. Joke number 3. At least the turnover rate is low. No one survives the first week. It's a cruel quip, but it loosens the tension in your shoulders. After what feels like an eternity, the master stops and silence crashes down. The prisoner lies panting, tears carving bright trails through grime. You step forward to release the straps, mindful of protocol. Victims must be left alive unless explicitly ordered otherwise, so their subsequent confessions hold weight. A mainstream fact reminds you torturers often needed confessions to be obtained voluntarily, lest they be dismissed by ecclesiastical courts. Yet the very definition of voluntary here remains disturbingly flexible. You collect the instruments, wiping each on a coarse rag dipped in vinegar. The pincers clang into a locked chest, dropping each piece with ritualistic care. You note the ledger entry you'll make: later time started, number of turns, approximate cry count. Fringe whispers suggest that some torturers refuse to document particularly brutal sessions, preferring oral bragging rights in taverns. You'll stick to the ledger paperwork is bad enough without rumors of rogue rack handlers. With the prisoner led away, staggering, broken, yet miraculously alive, you begin resetting the chamber for the next session. The damp is relentless. Moisture beads on the walls. You glance at the door, thinking of the outside world where ale flows freely, and the worst you deal with is a hangover. Historians still argue whether medieval torturers ever saw themselves as necessary public servants, or were reviled pariahs hiding behind masks of anonymity. You can't find much comfort in either view. You shoulder the rack's handle once more, this time to adjust the tension for the next arrival. Your fingers brush against the pig fat residue, sticky and cold. You inhale, tasting iron and vinegar, mastering the ritual that keeps you employed and marginally sane. The distant drip of water punctuates your thoughts, steady as a metronome. A light aside crosses your mind. I do it for the dungeon decor. Nothing beats medieval minimalism. The chamber remains mute, but you think the walls might crack a smile if they could. As you extinguish a torch to end your shift, its smoke curls through the arch above. You pause on the threshold, letting the outside air, still scented of hay and roasting barley, wash over your face. The master's footsteps fade behind you, leaving only the hush of stone. You pat the sturdy chest holding the instruments, a hard friend whose company you've grown accustomed to. You ascend the stairs, torch in hand, memories of rattling chains and pleading eyes trailing behind. Tomorrow night, the cycle repeats. Blood calls to blood in this crimson waltz. But for now you step into the night, leaving the screams to slumber until dawn. You trudge across the soggy churchyard under a silvered moon, the beam of your lantern bobbing like a startled firefly. Mud squelches beneath your boots as you shovel thick clumps of earth each scoop, sending a puff of damp soil into the night air. The distant toll of the curfew bell reminds you that time has slipped away, yet here you are again, the grave digger conscripted to wrestle with an unending tide of the dead. A mainstream fact, during the mid-14th century, Black Death European cities often resorted to mass burials, layering corpses in communal pits and covering them with quicklime to hasten decomposition. As you heave your forked shovel, iron-tined and heavier than you'd expect, you wonder how many bodies lie just inches below, stacked like firewood. Fringe lore whispers that some grave diggers sold cleaned bones to quack apothecaries ground into powder as a universal cure for scurvy, because nothing says medieval medicine like chewing on grandma's femur. Historians still argue whether such bone dust remedies ever did more than leave patients chewing unpleasant chalk. The air is thick with the stench of damp clay and decay, a heady perfume no rose could rival. You pause, shoulder throbbing, and your lantern reveals mottled crosses marking shallow graves, some abandoned mid-dig, their occupants still half exposed. A modern aside creeps in. Imagine OSHA reviewing this site, issuing citations for insufficient skeletal containment and inadequate spine support. Joke 1. At least your co-workers don't complain, but the rats might unionize if you keep stealing their leftovers. Your breath puffs in pale clouds, and the earth's chill seeps through your gloves, numbing your fingers around the shovel handle. A crow perched on a crumbling headstone croaks as if to say, "Nice weather for a grave, eh?" The silence is broken only by the rhythmic thud of blade meeting soil, a lullaby of labor that some say numbs you to the dead's final gasps. Fringe tidbit local legend claims that grave diggers once wore garlic necklaces to ward off the spirits of those interred alive by mistake, because no one wanted a Halloween bonus round of ghostly complaints. Yet garlic doesn't stop the rattling of bones when the earth settles. You stoop to clear a root, and the soil gives way easier than you'd thought, too easy. Beneath the loam, you glimpse a dark shroud, the weave of a burial cloth. You yank the shovel free and smooth the cloth aside. There, a single skeletal hand pokes through. You cover it, heart skipping a beat as if the dead might still rise for overtime. A second joke surfaces. The only thing worse than this dead hand is the paperwork you'll get for misplacing a skull. A mainstream fact, mass graves often exceeded 10 feet in depth, with bodies layered sometimes 3 deep, each separated by a sprinkle of lime. It was grim efficiency at its finest or worst, depending which end of the shovel you stand on. You heft another load of earth muscles creaking like old wagon wheels. Historians still argue whether grave diggers were recruited from convicted criminals or paid volunteers. Either way, no one queued up for this line of work on payday. The lantern's glow flickers, revealing slick stones that edge the pit. You wipe sweat from your brow. Even in cold nights, this job heats you up. The sweat salts your skin, mixing with the earth's grime into a paste that stings your eyes. Fringe archaeology suggests that some pits were excavated hastily, then abandoned when the stench became unbearable, only to be reopened when the next wave of plague arrived. That's double-duty dig, once cover it up, then dig again years later when the next plague season calls you back. Your back protests a dull roar echoing every vertebra. You lean on your shovel, listening to the wind sigh through barren branches overhead. In the distance, a dog howls a lone lament that tangos with your own tired sigh. A third joke flickers. I thought graveyard shifts were boring, but at least HR doesn't assign you this particular shift. You chuckle softly, the sound swallowed by the night. You drop to one knee and scoop up handfuls of soil to fill the pit's yawning maw. With each scoop, the hole shrinks, inching toward oblivion. You imagine the shapes buried here, young old clutching rosaries, perhaps clutching regrets. The church above might preach salvation, but down here in the dirt, there's only cold clay and the promise of silence. A fringe footnote whispered among old-timers that a gravedigger once found a buried treasure chest beneath a wealthy merchant's grave, only to sell it back to the merchant's family at 4 times its worth. If only every skull came with a gold doubloon. A mainstream fact reminds you that grave diggers often earned piecework pay charging per body interred, so the fatter the pit, the fatter your purse, though still meager. Glory days for the pockets, but your spine not so much. You shovel until dawn. Light bleeds across the sky, the first bird stirring where only silent stones stood. You fill the final layer, tamping the earth with your boot's heel until it rings like a drum. The pit closes everything sealed except the whispered wind. You plant an oak sapling nearby, a customary marker for plague burials, its roots reaching down to cradle the nameless beneath. Historians still argue whether these trees were meant as hopeful memorials or grim reminders of mortality. You stand shoulders straighter than exhaustion would permit and brush earth from your hands. Dawn's chill is sharper now, frost dusting the ground. A final joke escapes, I'd say, bury your regrets. But after tonight, I've buried enough regrets for a lifetime. You scoop up your lantern, its oil nearly spent, and turn toward the winding path out of the graveyard. As you slip through the gate, daylight blinks like a newcomer, the world suddenly full of color and sound. You catch the scent of fresh bread from a baker's oven. With any luck, it'll cover the lingering odor of decay. Tomorrow, the pits may call you back, and the cycle resumes. But for now, you stagger toward home, bones aching, lantern in hand, carrying stories the living can't imagine. Before exhaustion can claim you, a new summons arrives. The damp dawn of the marsh beckons you back into the world of work. You trudge through knee-high reeds, each step releasing a chorus of squelches and muted plops, as waterlogged boots collect more mud than your gravedigger's shovel ever did. Mist clings to your cloak, and the air tastes of wet moss and ancient peat, a sharp contrast to the dead earth aroma you left behind in the cemetery. A mainstream fact from the 12th century onward, leeching became a cornerstone of medieval medicine, prescribed to balance the four humors by drawing off excessive blood. You carry a wooden bucket strapped to your waist, its rim lined with damp moss, to keep the creatures snug until market. Historians still argue whether leeches were more valued for their bleeding properties or as exotic curiosities displayed in apothecary windows. You kneel at the water's edge, submerging your booted feet. The cold bite of the shallows sends a jolt up your spine, snapping you alert. Everywhere the marsh frogs croak like a broken chorus, punctuated by the distant screech of gulls wheeling overhead. Your breath puffs in ghostly clouds, and you can't help but shiver. This isn't a spa retreat. It's a living petri dish of bacteria, waterfowl, guano, and enthusiastic blood-seekers. A quirky tidbit folklore claims some leech collectors hummed lullabies to coax worms toward the warmth of human flesh, arguing that gentle tunes stimulated their appetite. Whether this ever truly worked or was merely a sleepy collector's excuse, no one can say for certain, yet cups of half-hummed melodies do echo along the marsh at sunrise, a sleepy serenade for these slimy barbers. You bend forward, exposing a patch of calf beneath your breeches, and before you can react, a slick, elongated shape slithers onto your skin. It fastens its sucker with a soft pop, and you feel a tugging weight as it begins its feast. You resist the urge to flinch. Sudden movement, might dislodge your catch. A subtle humor surfaces best tick-off therapy ever you murmur, as dozens of tiny surgeons take turns in your flesh. In a modern aside, you imagine OSHA regulations listing mandatory biohazard gear and leech containment protocols, complete with a Mardi Gras-style badge for each successful catch. Joke 1. At least I'm the only one being paid to get drained before dawn. The irony isn't lost on you as you tighten your grip on the bucket's handle, careful not to splash water or your new guests into the mud. Each time a leech reaches its capacity, it falls off with a wet slickness curling into the moss-lined vessel. You nudge it gently beneath the surface, watching it uncurl like a drifting ribbon. The bucket soon houses dozens of the wriggling horde, their bodies pulsing with the dark gift you'll sell to local healers. A fringe rumor suggests that some collectors preferred tobacco smoke to coax leeches off after feeding, believing the acrid fumes sped up detachment, though nobody's penned a medical journal to confirm it. Your lungs fill with the scent of decaying reeds and fragrant water lilies, an odd juxtaposition of rot and bloom. Mosquitoes dart around your face, and you swat at them with distracted annoyance. You almost laugh at the absurdity trading one type of blood loss for another. Joke 2. I came for the leeches, but these biters are freeloaders. You shake your head, wiping sweat from your brow. Even in the chill of dawn, you rise the bucket heavy against your thigh and press onward through knee-deep mire toward the next leech-rich pool. The wind carries the distant clang of the forge bell, a reminder that day laborers already crowd the streets oblivious to your slippery cargo. You navigate around a fallen willow, its roots twisting like giant serpents in the water. A fitting setting for your profession, if ever there was one. A mainstream fact drifts into your mind: apothecaries, often paid by the dose, each leech fetching a penny or two, meaning a successful morning could almost cover a week's rent, if you ignored the hidden costs of clothes ruined by damp and boots warped by mud. Historians still argue whether the demand for leeches ever outstripped supply enough to trigger early wildlife management. But here you see marshes stripped bare season after season, the worms disappearing for miles. You duck under low branches, water sloshing around your knees, and the bucket slams against your shin, eliciting a wince. You dip your hand into the cold water, retrieving a half-filled flask of fresh marsh water to rinse a lich still stuck on your boot. The creature recoils in the clear glass, a miniature black river twisting in slow motion. A fringe note: some collectors claim that leeches captured during the full moon possessed stronger healing powers, a superstition never substantiated, but eagerly repeated in quiet apothecary gossip. You pause at the marsh's edge, where reeds thin and a narrow track leads back to solid ground. The rising sun gilds the distant hills, painting the horizon in soft gold. You take a moment to survey your pile of buckets, each teeming with the morning's catch, a writhing menagerie of crimson-tinted bodies. A final joke surfaces: who needs coffee when morning comes with a side of hemoglobin? It feels strangely invigorating despite everything. Shouldering the buckets, you trek back through reeds, careful not to tip your harvest into the muck. The path crunches underfoot as earth turns to clay, and you reach the dyke road where a lone figure, the apothecary's apprentice, awaits your bounty. You offer a curt nod and hand over the leech-laden vessels, already feeling the pull of the next brutal task on tomorrow's horizon. Mud coats your boots, and your clothes smell of damp moss and leech breath. You brush a strand of hair from your forehead and think back to the Morgue Garden's medicinal herbs. Some of them once used in plague remedies, now companions to your bloodthirst charges. Historians still argue whether medieval patients ever benefited more from leeching or from merely believing in the ritual. You pocket those questions as you trudge toward the town gates, the bucket's wet plop marking each step. By the time you cross the threshold into cobblestone streets, the sun rides high enough to burn off the morning mist. You leave behind the marsh's hush, trading slimy quiet for the clamor of market stalls and hammer strikes. Tomorrow, you'll return to fresh horrors, perhaps hefting stones into catapults as the next brutal job demands. But for now, your leech-strewn jars line the apothecary's shelf, ready to bleed for another day. You trudge across the churned earth of the siege camp, the acrid tang of pitch and sweat hanging in the midday air. Wooden wheels creak under the weight of supply wagons, and the distant clang of hammers on iron rings out like a metallic heartbeat. Your task, join the catapult crew as a loader. No small feat, when small means a boulder the size of a pig. Remember how the swamp's cold bite felt on your legs. Brace yourself, because this heat and heft will test every sinew in your body. You approach the trebuchet, a towering contraption of oiled oak beams and taut ropes, its counterweight groove yawning like a beast's mouth. A mainstream fact by the 12th century, the counterweight trebuchet had largely supplanted its smaller traction predecessors in Europe, hurling projectiles over castle walls with unprecedented power. Historians still argue whether the counterweight or traction trebuchet was more prevalent during the Crusades, but tonight this monstrosity clearly favors your raw muscle over finesse. Your forearms burn as you hook the iron-lashed winch and heave a granite missile onto the loading platform. The stone surface is slick with moss and grit, and each inch of upward lift feels like wrestling a newborn calf. A modern aside crosses your mind. Imagine a union rep handing you a hard hat and a Weight Watchers manual. Keep it under 150 pounds. But there's no OSHA in medieval warfare, only the crack of wood and the grunt of labor. You shove the boulder deeper until it clicks into the catch groove. The air is thick with dust motes that dance in shafts of sunlight filtering through the framework. You wipe sweat from your brow, salt stinging your eyes like grainy cement, and taste the tang of metal from the gear's edges. Around you, fellow loaders grunt and strain their tunics plastered to their backs with sweat. A fringe tidbit rumor claims that superstitious engineers sometimes inscribed runes or demonic sigils on stones to psychologically terrify the defenders, because nothing says stay back like a blasted boulder signed by Beelzebub himself. Charge shouts crack the afternoon calm time to fire. You step back as the winch turns ropes singing under tension like a fiddle's strings. The massive counterweight, descends its oak frame groaning. You feel the ground tremor through your boots, a prelude to thunder. As the arm swings upward, you can almost sense the stone's exhilaration poised between gravity and flight. Another modern aside, imagine a carnival ride operator belting "Hold on tight" while flipping you head over heels. Joke 1, I didn't sign up for the medieval slingshot 3000. But here we are. Then the release triggers with a deafening crack. The projectile arcs high, trailing a plume of dust before slamming into distant battlements with a shock wave that rattles teeth. You raise your hands to catch falling splinters of stone. The defenders unleash a hail of arrows in response, thwipping into wooden shields and ricocheting off armor. Your shield mercifully is heavy planking. As you duck, you recall that rack room in the dungeon. At least the rack didn't fire back. Joke 2. I prefer my work without incoming projectiles. Thank you very much. A mainstream fact leaps to mind. Some sieges recorded ranges over 300 yards, with heavier missiles reaching nearly 500, making trebuchets the ultimate long-range artillery of the Middle Ages. Historians still argue whether some accounts exaggerated these distances, but no one doubts the devastation when stone met stone in thunderous collision. You brush grit from your shoulders and ready the next load, hearing the boss's bark. Keep 'em coming. Your next quarry is a rounded slab smoothed by river currents, lighter but trickier to stabilize. Your hands ache as you shift the rock, remembering the leech's wriggle and the rack's creak. Yet this is war's theater wrong step, and you're the one under fire. Fringe lore whispers that some loaders greased their gloves with animal fat to improve grip, a messy solution that also scented the siege lines like rotten bacon. You try not to think about your boots slipping in that swamp. You heave the slab into place, wince, then take a breath. The wind carries the tang of cordite scratch. That gunpowder won't arrive for centuries, but you detect something like ozone, a sharp promise of impact. Beside you, a fellow loader stumbles, dropping his stone. It clatters onto the ground, sending a shock wave through your bones. Gracefully done, you quip under your breath. Joke 3. You're about as steady as a newborn foal on ice. Regaining composure, you grip the winch again. Ropes hum, wood groans, and the counterweight's hollow thud resonates like a church bell at vespers. You step to the side, anticipating the release. The boulder flies, and you hear a cheer from your comrades. Even the cook pauses her stew, stirring to applaud the display of destructive power. You feel a fleeting sense of pride. Despite the brutality, you're part of a grand spectacle. The defenders begin sling retaliation. Chunks of hot pitch and smaller missiles arc toward you. You duck behind a hastily erected earth rampart, leather jerkin absorbing most of the sting. You consider how different this is from the quiet horror of mass graves or the meticulous cruelty of the rack. This is open chaos, raw and indiscriminate, yet each roll you realize demands a different kind of fortitude. A mainstream fact rounds out your reflection. Beside trebuchets, mangonels, and onagers offered alternative siege options, though typically with less accuracy. Historians still argue whether these variations significantly altered medieval siege tactics or were merely regional curiosities. At least you don't have to clean mangonel slime off your boots afterward, so there's that. The sun drips toward the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples. Your arms tremble as you prepare one final lift. You glance at the warded stones. Some bear crude etchings of saints' names intended as protective charms to ensure the engine's crew survived the roar. In an ironic twist, the same hand that carves St. Michael into wood also hurls death at the besieged. You heave the last boulder, feeling every joint protest and slot it in, just as the crew calls, "Fire!" The release is more violent this time, the tremor so strong you stagger back. You clutch a beam to steady yourself, heart pounding as if you've just woken from a nightmare. Around you, cheers mix with groans of exhaustion. Fringe whisper some catapult crews claimed they could fire as many as 20 stones before sunset, but only if they drank a mixture of wine and bruised berries to dull the pain. Medicine? Maybe. Hangover? Definitely. As twilight deepens, you bend to retrieve spare stones from the scattered supply pile. Your hands are smeared with dust and sap your shirt stained by sweat and pitch. You pause to listen, the distant clash of cutlery at the officer's tent, the crackle of campfires, the restless murmur of soldiers trading stories. In a moment of clarity, you realize that every brutal job you've known, the executioner's blade, the torture chamber's rack, the gravedigger's shovel, the leech collector's bucket, led you here balancing life and death on a sling of ropes and wood. You set aside the last stone muscles quivering and climb onto the platform to unscrew the winch's locking pin. The creak of wood underfoot feels almost comforting now, like the familiar squeak of the rack's rollers. You unfasten a loose rope and let it fall to the ground, each slack coil a sigh of relief. You smell roast mutton drifting from the cook's pot and realize the war engine's hunger is sated for the night. As you descend from the trebuchet's shadow, the earth softens underfoot, a welcome change from the hard labor of lever and lever. You stretch your arms, feeling the day's toil settle into every muscle. The sky's deep indigo is pricked by the first stars, and you remember the owl's hush at the scaffold, now replaced by crickets' lullabies. Tomorrow, new horrors await, perhaps hauling stones for road building or cleaning sewers beneath the city. But tonight, you leave the catapult behind, breathing in the cool evening air. You walk toward the camp's edge, footsteps light, despite the exhaustion. The world feels muted, as if the stones you launched carried away the day's clamor. You take one last look at the trebuchet, its silhouette stark against the night sky, and nod in reluctant respect. Then you turn away, knowing sleep will come heavy and dreamless, your muscles whispering tales of boulders and battle. You step away from the fading cheers of the trebuchet crew lantern swinging at your side and head toward the yawning maw of the siege works. The camp's clamor recedes behind you, replaced by the steady drip of sweat and the dull scrape of shovel against earth. Here the engineers have drawn a network of muddy trenches, and your task is clear: dig deeper, broader, stronger, while enemy archers pepper your comrades with relentless volleys. You squat by the trench's edge, hefting a weighted spade whose iron head gleams with fresh rainwater and old blood. Each swing sends clods of earth flying in heavy arcs, thudding into the trench like cannon fire. The mud is thick, almost clay-like, and clings to your boots, pulling at each step as if reluctant to let you go. A mainstream fact during medieval sieges, sappers routinely excavated zigzagging trenches known as approach works so attackers could advance toward walls under partial cover. These earthworks often stretched for hundreds of yards, a testament to sheer labor over brute force. Historians still argue whether zigzag or straight-line trenches offered better protection, but tonight you'll dig both. The air tastes of iron and wet straw. You pause to catch your breath, wiping your brow where droplets of sweat mingle with specks of mud. A fringe tidbit floats through your mind. Some soldiers swore that burying a horseshoe at the trench's lip warded off tunneling attacks from beneath an old superstitious gambit they called horseshoe shield. Whether it ever thwarted a mine shaft remains uncertain, but the clink of iron underfoot might just make a tunneler think twice. Historians still argue whether these charms had any real effect or were simply morale-boosting nonsense. You clench your fingers around the spade's worn handle, feeling the grooves carved by countless previous diggers. The trench walls loom on either side, slick with rainwater and the occasional burrowed root. You sink a knee into the mire and drive the blade deep, levering out a massive chunk of sod laced with nifty pebbles and worm trails. The soil smell, earthy, pungent, alive, rises up, filling your lungs with the raw breath of the battlefield. A silent bird calls overhead, a single note that echoes in the hollowed corridor you're carving. Your muscles hum with exertion. Every swing is a negotiation between strength and stamina. You lean in, bracing your foot against the shovel, and hoist another load. The trench floor sinks lower inches, turning to feet as you and your crew forge forward. Each time you lift, your arms tremble, and you taste grit on your tongue. Joke one springs to mind. If I wanted to taste mud, I'd buy the cheap cheese back at camp. Around you, fellow diggers share nods of solidarity, their faces smeared in grime. One curses as a root snaps under his blade, another whistles off-key trying to lighten the mood. Despite the relentless work camaraderie binds you, this is teamwork under the most literal dirt. A mainstream fact reminds you that trench construction was a communal effort, often involving peasants pressed into service alongside trained engineers. The speed of digging could make or break a siege. You glance at the dirt flying around you and silently thank the distant sappers for choosing your shift. The sound of twanging boughs echoes from the castle walls above. Arrows hiss through the air and thud into the unsteady earthen barricade you're building. You grit your teeth, hugging the trench wall as one whizzes past, barely missing your shoulder. Modern asides flash. Imagine a medieval safety briefing. Arrows may fly. Hard hats not provided. Joke 2. I always wanted to try dodgeball, just not with poisoned shafts. A fringe rumor has it that some trench diggers painted white lines on the ground to mark their progress, a primitive blueprint for future fortifications, though nobody ever explained if the enemy would respect the chalk. Regardless, you follow a simple guideline. Dig at a 45-degree angle to avoid cave-ins or face the grim possibility of being buried alive. You pause to inspect the angle, tapping the trench floor with your heel. The wall holds firm, though tiny pebbles tumble down in sporadic trickles. Your shovelful of mud lands with a splash in the waiting wheelbarrow, its wooden slats slick and mossy. The wheelbarrow's single wheel groans as your comrade wheels it away to dump at the earth ramp. You toss a nod and turn back, shoulder throbbing, where the spade's haft digs into your collarbone. The path behind you slowly fills, creating a dam against potential counterattacks. You push on the rhythmic scrape of hose and picks rising into a muddy symphony. Even in this gloom, sunlight filters through breaks in the storm clouds, casting mottled shadows across the trench floor. Each patch of light feels like a promise one day you'll see open sky again without a fortress looming. For now, you focus on the grunt work, digging, hauling, shaping each motion a testament to human tenacity. An open scholarly debate buzzes through your mind. Historians still argue whether trench digging slowed offensive momentum more than undermining or artillery. But whoever first invented this method deserves a stiff drink. A third joke bubbles up as you lean on your spade. I always wanted to make a groundbreaking discovery, but this is a bit too literal. You crack a grin, the humor cutting through the ache in your back. Your comrades snicker, and for a moment the battlefield's weight seems lighter. The trench reaches a corner. You pause to admire the acute angle designed to minimize blind spots and crossfire. The slight bend in the earth allows defenders' arrows to glance off at less lethal angles, or so the engineers claim. You descend further each step, bringing you closer to the enemy's tower foundations. You imagine the stone giants looming above their walls, broad as rivers, and feel a surge of both awe and defiance. As the trench deepens, water begins to pool at your feet, rain sneaking in from overhead, mixing with seepage from the castle's moat. Your boots squish in the cool puddle, and the mud gives an extra suction as you lift. You curse softly, slipping for a heartbeat before regaining your balance. Fringe lore whispers that some diggers carried sponges to soak up minor floods, but your crew prefers to tough it out and call any wet slips free massage sessions. It's grim humor, but it eases the tension. Hour turns to hour. The sun dips low, blood red behind the walls you threaten. Your trench grows long and narrow, a mortal pathway for future assaults. You complete the final stretch, slamming the spade down one last time. The angle is perfect, the depth just enough to shield from most direct fire. You lean over the edge, peering at the muddy trench bottom, feeling the torque of victory in your shoulders. Behind you, the earth ramp rises in stepped layers, ready to accept ladders or siege towers. You heft a rock to test the sidewall's firmness. It holds firm, though you spot a potential bulge. A quick patch of wattle and daub from nearby saplings and clay will shore it up by dawn. A mainstream fact surfaces. Earthworks like these were often repaired nightly to withstand enemy sorties, requiring constant vigilance. Historians still argue whether defenders' counter-digging was more disruptive than simple repair work. But either way, the night shift will have their hands full. You finally drop your tools and sit on the trench's lip boots, dangling over the edge. The cool air brushes your face, carrying the distant scent of cooking stews and the sharper tang of wet clay. Your fellow diggers gather for a meager supper, hardtack, dipped in broth, washed down with ale so weak it might have been colored mud. You take a bite, the stale bread scratching your throat, and sip the ale grateful for its warmth. As darkness fully descends, torches flicker along the trench walls, casting tall, jittery silhouettes. You stretch your aching back, feeling every groove in your spine realign. Tomorrow, you'll return to deepen the line or start a new approach. The siege never sleeps, and neither do its laborers. But for now, you allow yourself a moment of stillness, watching the trench you carved cut a stark slash through the battlefield. You rise, gather in your tools, the mud clinging in reluctant clumps. Each piece you carry tells the story of sweat and persistence of human hands, shaping fate one spadeful at a time. You step away from the trench's edge, lantern in hand, and follow the winding path, back to camp muscles humming with exhaustion and quiet pride. You slip into the damp alleyways as dusk settles, lantern in hand, and boots echoing on slick cobblestones littered with refuse. The stench of rotting vegetables and sour ale clings to the air, a perfume that only the most dedicated rat hunter could love. Tonight, you're on duty as the plague rat hunter tracker of vermin whose twitching whiskers and tainted fleas helped spread the Black Death. Remember those squeaking leeches back in the marsh? These little scavengers are even less polite about personal space. A mainstream fact, during the mid-14th century plague outbreaks, rats infested urban centers, their fleas transmitting Yersinia pestis bacteria to humans and fueling mortality rates as high as 60% in some cities. Historians still argue whether black rats Rattus rattus or brown rats Rattus norvegicus were the primary culprits given imprecise medieval natural histories. Either way, it's not exactly a job you brag about at tavern gatherings. You crouch behind a broken barrel and scan the shadows. Your tools, a long-handled snare, a burlap sack, and a small club fashioned from a tree branch. Fringe lore holds that some rat catchers carried a tame ferret to corner the rodents, but you prefer the direct approach, no fluffy accomplices to raise veterinary questions later. A modern aside flits through your mind. Imagine PETA protesting rodent rights complete with bumper stickers saying, "Give rats a chance." Joke one, I bet they'd say, trapping is a rat race of ethics. A faint scuttle draws your attention to a gap beneath a door. You press your ear to the wood and hear claws pattering against worn floorboards. With a quick motion, you slide the snare into place and hold your breath. The lantern's glow trembles, casting dancing shadows across rotten sacks of grain that might as well be a gourmet buffet to these freeloaders. Your heart hammers matching the frantic rat beat until snap, the snare tightens around a thrashing tail. You pull back, securing both ends of the rope to a post, trapping your quarry. You heft the burlap sack open and drop the struggling creature inside. Its paws scrabble at the sack's folds, teeth bared in panic. The rat's fur is matted, smeared with sludge and who knows what. You tie the sack's mouth with a leather thong, then wipe sweat from your brow. The air's damp chill makes your palms slippery, but you manage. A fringed tidbit some rat catchers reputedly coated their traps with a paste of arsenic and cheese, turning bait into a death sentence effective but messily toxic. No thanks. You would rather dispose of them naturally then poison yourself by accident. You rise and slip around the corner, keeping low as you scout for more movement. The alley yawns before you slick with runoff from hovels above. You step carefully, avoiding puddles that might betray your approach with splashes. A rat darts across your path, whiskers twitching, and you chase it with nimble strides. Your boots skid, sending a spray of gravel that crunches like ancient bones. Joke 2. At least here, the bones belong to someone you actually want to catch. You dive after the rodent, flattening yourself behind a barrel just in time to avoid its frenzied dash. With a flourish, you set another snare heart, thudding in your ears. The city around you hums with distant bells and muffled prayers, as though the church hopes a few more masses might ward off these furry plague carriers. A mainstream fact surfaces: municipal authorities sometimes offered bounties for every rat tail delivered, incentivizing ratters to collect corpses of their victims. But this led to rats bred solely to supply the market. Historians still argue whether these bounties did more harm than good by encouraging rat farms. Yet the incentive was too lucrative to ignore. You pause at the base of a collapsed wall, checking your sack. It's already half full of squeaking prizes. The rat's chittering echoes within as it claws at the burlap, and you cock your head. A whisper passes through city rumor mills. Some rat catchers insisted on wearing gloves made from cat fur, believing feline scent would confuse the rodents into thinking a cat was nearby. You pat your own gauntleted hands, admitting you'd rather go barehanded and risk a nip than smell like a pet shop. Night deepens, and the lantern's glow reaches fewer nooks. You navigate by memory, trusting worn stone patterns and a handful of stray lantern drivers who point you toward fresh garbage heaps. Rats love unattended leftovers, fish bones, rotten turnips, the occasional half-eaten loaf. You slide beneath a wooden cart piled with refuse and set your last snare. A pair of rats emerges, only to become entangled together, chittering angrily at each other as they tumble. You scoop them up together, double catch. A light joke surfaces. I always wanted a furry dice roll. Snake eyes never sounded so cute. You stand in the middle of the alley sack, bulging, and count your haul. The twitching tails inside resemble a macabre fringe decoration. A mainstream fact-skilled rat catchers could collect hundreds in a single night, earning as much as a laborer's weekly wage in a few hours. Yet the work demanded stealth courage and an iron stomach. Historians still argue whether rat catching was considered a craft guild worthy of formal apprenticeship or viewed as disreputable work reserved for society's fringes. You trudge back to the town square's edge, lantern bobbing, and find the appointed drop-off barrel, a large wooden drum marked with the city seal. You untie the burlap sack and empty its contents into the barrel. The rats scramble inside, and you slam the lid shut, locking the sliding metal bar. The drum's cavernous echo feels like a final resting place, though hardly restful for its inhabitants. You tap the side twice, signaling to the official watching from a guard perch above that your quota is met. The official peers over the railing, illuminating your catch with a torch. He nods approvingly, then jots down a tally in a ledger, rat count, time your name. Fringe chatter says some officials trimmed numbers to avoid extra payments, but your honest record nets, you silver pennies, and a nod from the town council. A third joke tumbles out. I'd say I'm killing it, but that might upset the rat farms. You turn to leave and notice the cobblestones glitter in torchlight as if flecked with tiny stars. The smells of burning pine and stale brew swirl together, and you inhale deeply, tasting freedom for now. The next wave of plague may demand your services again, but this night you've done your duty. You walk toward home, slipping past shuttered windows, where families huddle indoors, believing doors and prayers suffice against unseen fleas. As you cross into the quieter lanes, your boots click on stones worn smooth by countless feet, peasant merchant pilgrim and rat hunter alike. You pat the empty bucket swinging by your side, once used for leeches and now redundant. Each tool marks a chapter in your brutal resume. Executioner's blade rack, assistant's rake, gravedigger's spade, leech collector's bucket, catapult, loader's groan, trench digger's spade, and now rat hunter's snare. Tomorrow, you may even face the stench of sewers, but tonight, your alley prowling is done. You extinguish your lantern's flame against the wall and let shadows swallow you. The alley returns to hushed darkness, punctuated by distant church bells reminding the living to pray. As you slip through an archway back to your lodgings, you feel the fur of a rat tail bristle in memory proof of survival for now. You climb the narrow stairs to your room, muscles unwinding as you shed your cloak and boots. Rats may carry plague, but you carry the stories. And perhaps that's the deadliest thing of all. You pry open the heavy iron grate, the hinges groaning like a wounded beast, and lower yourself into the yawning darkness below. The faint glow of your torch flickers across slick stone walls etched with century of slime. You slip on a puddle of foul runoff hips, colliding with the dank corridor as water sloshes around your boots. Welcome to the life of a medieval sewer cleaner, where every step is a negotiation with rot and every breath tastes like yesterday's kitchen refuse mixed with last week's rain. A mainstream fact. By the 13th century, major European cities such as Paris and London maintained rudimentary sewer networks, often adaptations of ancient Roman drains that carried storm water and household waste beneath crowded streets, though regular maintenance was rare and hazardous. Historians still argue whether these sewers truly protected urban populations from waterborne disease, or simply funneled filth into unsuspecting rivers. You trudge forward, torch held high at sputtering flame, casting quivering shadows on the vaulted ceiling. The tunnel's arch narrows, forcing you to stoop low. Your cloak flaps like a moth's wings in the humid, fetid air. The stench is overwhelming, a thick haze of human excrement, decomposing food scraps, and that unmistakable note of urine left to ferment. You clamp your nostrils shut for a moment, but the stench wedges itself into your memory like an unwanted guest. Fringe lore whispers that some sewer cleaners chewed cloves to mask the smell, only to find their breath smelled like a spice rack gone bad. Your boots squelch through thigh-high sludge, and you pause to adjust the leather thong binding your torch. Every rhythm of your heartbeat booms in your ears, competing with the distant drip-drip of unseen stalactites of effluent. You lean on your shovel, an iron head welded to a long handle, its edge dulled from cracking through hardened waste and shifting occasional stone blockages. A modern aside drifts in Imagine OSHA, mandating biohazard suits and respirators before you're allowed within 20 feet of this mess. Joke 1. I always wanted to be a deep-sea diver. I just didn't expect the sea to be made of garbage. You shine your torch down a narrow side channel where the flow slows to a splotchy trickle. With a grunt, you jam your shovel into the muck and lever out a congealed mass of kitchen scraps, rags, and every sewer cleaner's nightmare rat nests. The rods scuttle away in the gloom, squeaking curses as they dart into deeper shadows. You kick the tangle aside and chip the clog until water begins to trickle again, then rush to clear the remaining blockage before the main drain floods back. Fringe tidbit rumor suggests that some cleaners set traps of boiled turnips to lure rats out of nests, only to find themselves in fierce battles with rat queens defending their brood. Each heave of the shovel sends a stink plume your way, and you taste metal and rot at the back of your throat. Your shoulders ache from hours bent in the cold, clammy corridor. A mainstream fact surfaces. Medieval sewer workers were often hired as day laborers paid by the length of drainage cleared, incentivizing them to remove blockages quickly, though this piecework system sometimes led to shoddy repairs. Historians still argue whether these laborers were drawn from convict servitude or recruited from the ranks of the impoverished volunteer class. You catch a glimpse of scrawled graffiti on the wall, an angelic figure holding a chamber pot captioned "Blessed Relief," and crack a weary smile. Joke 2. The only heavenly relief is knowing I'll never see this place in my dreams. Or maybe I will. You trudge onward, guided by the pungent smell of open air leaking through a distant exit shaft. Hope glimmers ahead, though the path is fraught with hazards, slippery algae coating the flagstones, sudden drops into deeper pits, and the ever-present risk of cave-ins where water has washed away the mortar. Your torchlight reveals a half-submerged lead pipe bursting through the wall, its rivets spewing a steamy gush of warm sewage. You chuckle darkly. Nothing says VIP treatment like molten waste. Gently, you wedge a cloth strip around the leak to slow the flow, planning a proper patch once you've returned with wooden staves and pitch. Fringe chatter holds that some resourceful cleaners used boiled animal skins as temporary seals, only to have rats gnaw them away overnight. You shudder at the thought, ignoring the slimy ripple beneath the surface that might just be a rat investigating dinner. You realize your hands are slick with muck, your gloves long since abandoned after springing a leak. You rinse them in stagnant water, but the grime refuses to budge. Your fingertips prickle with tiny cuts, yesterday's toothbrush shards, and broken pot fragments hiding in the sludge. You clamp your teeth, determined to finish this stretch. The echo of dripping water becomes a lullaby, oddly soothing in its consistency. Historians still argue whether medieval cities viewed sewers as a triumph of urban planning or a necessary evil tolerated only until the next catastrophic flood. You press onward, rounding a bend until you spot the blocked grate of a street inlet. Fresh daylight leaks through the bars, a beacon calling you back to the noisy world above. With renewed energy, you position your shovel and begin chiseling at the congealed mat of grit and tangled rags. The clang of metal on the stone reverberates, rattling loose shards of brick that tumble behind you with a satisfying clatter. A final joke trickles out. This is literally dirt work, minus the prestige. Minutes stretch as you chip away sweat, mingling with sewer slime down your spine. Every impact sends shivers up your arms. Every freed fragment carries a wave of relief, followed by another whiff of decay. Finally, a rush of fresh water surges through, flushing the remnants into the main drain. You leap back as the flow clears, watching the dark water swirl away with the triumphant hiss. You rise, muscles trembling, and hold your torch aloft to verify the passage is clear. Water gushes past your boots, carrying away the worst of the grit. You scoop a handful of the flowing stream and wash your face, tasting mud and relief. The grate above rattles. Townsfolk must have noticed the sudden drainage. Shouts echo down the shaft. Thank you, cleaner? Whether they truly mean it or merely celebrate not having sewage seep into their basements, you'll never know. Before climbing out, you pause to inspect the tunnel's walls. Moss retreats where the clear water now runs. Discarded scraps drift downstream like mourners bearing funeral garlands. A mainstream fact reminds you, some medieval cities required property owners to clear inlets in front of their homes, though enforcement was lax and often fell to municipal cleaners like you. Fringe legend insists that phantom figures, so-called mole men, haunted the sewers, dragging unsuspecting cleaners into the depths. No one's ever proved it, but the rapid disappearances keep new recruits jittery. You secure your torch, extinguishing it against the wall to avoid singeing the low vault overhead. The darkness presses in, but your hands know the way, tracing the damp stones toward the ladder rungs. You climb each iron bar, slick but sturdy, until daylight finally bursts through the grate. You push it open, flinging yourself onto the cobblestones as sunshine blinds your eyes. The city above seems impossibly clean, birds chirping in blissful ignorance of what lies just beneath. You straighten your back, feeling the stiffness ease as you inhale free air. Your clothes sag under the grime, your boots clinking with residual sludge. A passerby wrinkles their nose, probably lamenting the smell, while you simply shrug and pocket a few silver pennies deposited by the grateful bailiff. A final whisper crosses your mind. You've never smelled anything quite like victory. As you hoist yourself to your feet, you recall the rat hunter's alley, the trench digger's muddy corridor, and the catapult loader's dusty boulders, yet none matched the raw intimacy of human waste. You pat your shovel in thanks. Tomorrow, you may return to mortal peril in the salt mines or feed caustic vats in the tannery, but tonight, you've conquered the city's bowels. You brush off your cloak, the residue falling away in clumps, and walk toward the tavern where clean ale awaits you, at least until you look too closely at the tankard's rim. You emerge from the dank bowels of the city's sewers with your cloak still sagging under the weight of filth, but there's no time to wash off the stench. You're off to the salt mines by sunrise. You trudge along the rutted cart track toward the mine entrance, breathing in the crisp air as though savoring your last breath of fresh oxygen. Ahead, the gaping mouth of the mine yawns into the cliffside like a hungry maw, ready to swallow you whole A mainstream fact, medieval salt, prized for preserving food and seasoning broths, was often harvested from deep mines or inland salt springs. By the 13th century, European governments recognized salt's economic importance, imposing taxes that sometimes led to violent revolts, such as the French Gabelle uprisings. Historians still argue whether salt taxes hindered urban growth more than they filled royal coffers. But one thing's clear: you're about to earn every ounce of your pay. You shoulder a heavy leather pannier and duck under the low wooden lintel protecting the entrance. The warm breath of the earth flows over you, humid, acrid whispering of ancient seas trapped in stone. Your torch sputters as you step onto the rail tracks laid for ore carts, rails that gleam faintly from centuries of salt dust. You pause, listening to the drip-drip of brine-laced water and the distant clank of pickaxes echoing through narrow tunnels. A fringe tidbit rumor claims that some miners whispered prayers to petrified sea creatures they called salt worms, believing these fossilized fauna guarded the veins of salt. Whether these creatures ever existed or were merely misidentified ammonites remains a matter of scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether such folkloric beliefs actually improved miners' luck or simply soothed their nerves. In the pitch black, you make your way to the first face, where the shaft splits into a tangle of galleries. Your partner, a wiry fellow named Thomas, grins at you, torchlight dancing on his sweat-slicked brow. He hands you a sturdy iron pick, its head nicked from countless strikes, and you tap it against your palm, its reassuring weight grounding you. Around you, other miners crouch at their stations, chiseling fragments of rock from the walls, as the salty taste coats their teeth with every freed flake. Your boots slip on a thin film of salt crystals that coat the floor like treacherous snow. You crouch low, raising the pick above your shoulder, and swing with raw force. The iron head bites into the wall with a resonant crack, sending a spray of glittering granules into the air. You feel each tremor reverberate up your arm knuckles, white with effort. Joke one, I always dreamed of working a white-collar job. I just didn't expect it to be under a mountain. The wall yields after several hits, and you pry loose a chunk of rock encrusted with pure salt. Its crystalline structure catches the torchlight, refracting tiny rainbows across the tunnel walls. You heft the shard into your pannier and heft in another, each piece weighing more than your lunch. A mainstream fact surfaces salt mining techniques range from simple hammer and chisel extraction to more advanced methods using water to dissolve brine in solution, mining later evaporated in salt pans. Historians still argue whether early solution mining predated deep shaft mining in Europe, but neither method spared you the back-breaking labor. Thomas nods toward a narrow passage where the air grows noticeably warmer, an unexpected cauldron of geothermal heat trapped deeper in the rock. You follow, wincing, as beads of sweat form on your forehead despite the cold, damp environment. The passage opens into a vaulted chamber where an ancient wooden platform holds barrels of collecting brine dripping from the ceiling. Fringe lore says these drip barrels were once guarded by hooded monks who chanted psalms to bless the harvest. Whether their prayers improved the salt yield or simply past the long hours underground, remains uncertain. You pause to fill a leather flask with the briny drippings a treat for miners who believed sipping concentrated brine cured fatigue and warded off muscle cramps. You take a cautious sip. The liquid is sharp and stings like seawater in a fresh cut, but you steel yourself and swallow. Joke 2. It's like trying to swallow a chunk of the ocean. Talk about liquid courage. Beyond the barrel chamber, you find the main haulage rail, where a small cart stands ready. You and Thomas lift the panniers onto the cart, 2 per side, and lock the wooden lashings in place. The rails creak under the added burden as you push the cart along the slick tracks, the salt crystals crunching beneath your boots in a brittle symphony. A mainstream fact surfaces: medieval mine carts ran on simple wooden rails or iron tracks often pushed by human or animal power. The first mechanized tramways wouldn't appear until centuries later. Historians still argue whether animals or humans provided the primary haulage force in different regions. But tonight, it's purely human. The cart passes through a tunnel so narrow you have to turn sideways, shoulders scraping against the walls, salt dust falling like dirty snow. You navigate by feel as much as sight, recalling every kink in the rail from countless journeys. Birdsong echoes faintly impossible, you think, until you realize it's the clatter of tools from the surface filtered down shafts. You push on, guided by memory and the hum of brine trickling somewhere above. At last, you glimpse a distant glow lanterns marking the loading bay. You accelerate, sweat and salt crusting on your skin. With a grunt, you maneuver the cart onto a side spur, clattering into place beside piles of crystalline mounds. You hop down, shaking out the panniers and dumping the salt into a wooden trough. The crystals shift and settle in a miniature avalanche of white. A fringed tidbit flits through your mind. Some miners sculpted cathedrals from excess salt crystals during lulls, trading intricate models with neighboring mines as tokens of craftsmanship. Whether any of these salt cathedrals survived the next excavation remains unclear. You tap the salt pile, watching tiny crystals glitter like diamond dust. You heft the empty panniers and slung them over your back. The air smells of brine and anticipation. Soon this salt will cure hams, preserve grains, and flavor stews across the kingdom. A mainstream fact strikes seasoned miners often suffered from salt sickness, a chronic cough and skin irritation caused by inhaling fine salt particles. Protective masks were unheard of, leaving lungs and throats to bear the punishment. Historians still argue whether salt sickness shortened miners' lives significantly or merely contributed to a general decline in health. But either way, your throat already feels raw. You stretch, cracking your spine as you stand. The solid rock beneath your feet and the weight in your panniers affirm the day's labor. Joke 3. I guess you could call me a real salt-of-the-earth kind of guy, just, without the luxury of air conditioning. Ahead, a shaft ladder beckons time to exit. You climb the rungs, each iron bar slicked with salt seepage, until daylight blazes overhead. You push the hatch aside, and the cool breeze of the surface world washes over you, carrying hints of wood smoke and morning dew. You emerge, blinking, squinting at the sun without the filter of torchlight. Tomas follows, hauling a last pannier, and raises a hand in greeting. You both laugh, raw throats echoing with hoarse chuckles. The cart track glistens in the morning light, and you notice how clean everything appears. The fresh air, the green grass, the chirping birds. For a moment, you forget the weight of your pannier, but as soon as you straighten, the salt presses into your back like a stubborn reminder. You trudge back toward town panniers, balanced each step a crunch of brittle crystals beneath your boots. The road builder's pick awaits tomorrow. The tannery's vats will call next, and the sea's depths of fishing will beckon after that. But for now, your bounty of salt is your sole treasure, white gold, still warm from the earth's belly. As you reach the town gates, guards inspect your hall-tapping crystals for purity. They nod in approval and wave you through coin purses jingling in gratitude. You breathe in the scented breeze. Today at least you've earned your keep. You unfurl your cloak, letting the breeze sweep away the worst of the dust, and head toward the market square, ready to trade your white gold for copper and comfort. You taste a hint of brine on your lips and realize that every job you've known has left a mark on your body, blood, grime, sweat, and now salt. Yet with each task you survive, adapt, and endure. Tonight, your bed will feel impossibly soft, your blanket impossibly clean, and your lungs impossibly fresh. But you know tomorrow you'll return to another brutal post, embracing the harsh world one grueling shift at a time. You trudge through the narrow lane leading to the tannery, the pungent aroma of curing hides thickening the air like an uninvited guest. Your boots clack on uneven cobblestones, slick with spills of brine and lime wash. Soon enough, you arrive at a squat timber building whose open doors reveal vats of murky liquid bubbling with noxious vigor. Tonight, you step into the role of the tannery apprentice, where every breath tastes of caustic fumes, and every splash feels like acid kisses on your skin. A mainstream fact, medieval tanneries employed a multi-stage process to transform animal hides into leather, often beginning with soaking skins in lime to loosen hair and flesh, followed by repeated soaking in tannin-rich solutions made from oak bark or sumac leaves. Historians still argue whether oak or hemlock bark produced more durable leather, but in this town, oak reigns supreme, yielding a rich chestnut hue, prized by shoemakers. You duck under a low beam and feel the heat hit you, a humid cauldron of steam rising from a row of stone vats. Each bears a thick slurry of lime and water, frothing at the edges as bacterial fermentation works its grim magic. You slip off your gloves and plunge your arms into the first vat, creamy and slick. The caustic mixture bites at your forearms, making your skin tingle as if thousands of invisible needles prick every pore. A fringed tidbit flits into your mind. Some veteran tanners whispered that the best hides came from sheep fed on juniper berries, believing the unique fat composition improved the leather's strength and scent. Whether juniper-fed sheep ever roamed these lands remains a matter of local lore and heated debate. Despite the sting, you yank a stretched hide from the lime bath and dump it onto a wooden horse and A-frame rack with crossbars for draping. The hide glistens like a translucent jellyfish, milky and alien. You brush off chunks of flesh and hair with a curved scraper called a deliming knife, the blade dull from constant use. Each pass peels away the unwanted tissue in ragged strips that fall into a rotting heap below. You inhale deeply, tasting chalk and decay. A modern aside invades your thoughts. Imagine wearing a biohazard suit and respirator complete with a Leather Master Pro badge. Oh, how times have changed. Joke 1, I always wanted to work with animal skin, just not this up close and personal. Once the flesh is removed, you heft the hide into the next vat, where oak bark shavings bubble in tawny water. You sink your arms again, feeling the tannin latch onto collagen fibers with a subtle scratchy drag. The liquid's color deepens around your arms, staining your sleeves and the exposed cuffs of your tunic. You lean forward, catching your reflection in the vat's surface, gaunt cheeks, flecks of lime on your brow eyes, narrowed in grim concentration. Fringe rumor holds that some apprentices rub the spent bark into their hands to toughen their skin for future shifts, but you suspect the real result was nails stained like old wood. A mainstream fact, surfaces proper tanning, could take weeks, each stage requiring soak times adjusted for temperature and bark concentration. Failing to follow precise timing risked brittle or rancid leather. Historians still argue whether medieval tanners used secret additives, eggs, oils, even animal brains to soften hides, but no one denies the gooey texture of brain-tanned leather would feel like butter under a craftsman's fingers. You glance at a barrel marked "Brain Bath with Trepidation Tonight." That ritual waits for another apprentice. You heave the tannin-infused hide onto a frame for stretching and scraping, pulling it taut with wooden pegs. The hide resists like a stubborn sail, but bit by bit you pry and pull until it hangs firm. The wooden pegs dig into the edges of the hide, leaving puncture marks you'll later trim away. Sweat drips from your hairline, steady droplets that land on the slick surface and sizzle in the vat's heat. Joke 2. I prefer my stretching in yoga class not on animal skin. Across the workshop, fellow apprentices heft hides as well, their faces lit by tallow lamps that drip molten fat onto stone floors. The room's haze dims the lamp's glow into halos of orange, lending the space an otherworldly aura. You duck under a low beam, feeling its splintered grain brush your hair, and catch your reflection in a polished hide drying on the wall, a distorted, ghostly image. A mainstream fact reminds you many tanneries situated outside city walls to avoid noxious odors and fires used in drying, yet smoke still wafted through open windows into nearby fields. Historians still argue whether tannery sites should have been located downstream of urban centers to reduce harm, but towns grew around these odor sources, accepting the stink as the price of leather goods. You wipe your hands on a rag, then reach for a vat of lime-wash solution used to remove residual tannin before finishing. The thick paste clings to your fingers, the smell of fermented bark receding as chalky lime dominates. You scrub a final patch on the hide surface, then sling it onto a drying rack lined with straw. The hide's edges curl slightly as moisture seeps out, leaving behind supple brown leather that gleams when caught in a lamp's glow. Fringe lore suggests that some tanners bake their leather in communal ovens to speed drying efficient but prone to overcooking hides into brittle crisps. You're glad tonight's batch follows tradition. As you move from vat to frame, your feet slide in puddles of brine and bark slurry. The floor feels like a mosaic of slick stones and wooden planks. You mind your step, mindful that one misstep could send you face first into a vat of lime. A third joke drifts through. It's a slippery slope to a new career in mud wrestling. Your nose twitches as a coppery tang drifts through the air, a hidden leak in a goat bladder hung to catch drips from a vat overhead. You inspect it. The bladder's been patched too many times, leather thinning at its base. You tie a new patch from leftover hide, pressing bark tan scraps over the tear. Fringe enthusiasts maintain that goat bladder patches lent a subtle aroma to the leather, enhancing its appeal among discerning buyers. Whether buyers noticed or simply accepted it as character remains debated. The apprentice master calls out, signaling the end of your shift. You step back, shoulders stiff, as other tanners enter to inspect the drying works. Their nods of approval, inspecting grain flexibility, absence of holes, mean your hides meet the workshop's high standards. A mainstream fact resonates: leather from medieval tanneries supplied everything from harnesses and footwear to book bindings and armor linings. Tanners held a crucial economic role, though often shunned for their odorous trade. Historians still argue whether tanners formed guilds as powerful as blacksmiths, or labored on the fringes of municipal politics. Either way, you've earned your place here tonight. You rinse your hands in a wooden trough, scraping off the worst of the slurry before reaching for a watering jug. The cold water hisses on contact, erasing lime bark and sweat in a cooling rush. You splash your face, feeling grime wash away in rivulets, and relish the brief relief. Joke 3, I'd say this water's precious, but after tonight, I'll drink anything that isn't a vat. Your cloak, once clean, now hangs heavy with slurry streaks and stray pebbles. You tongue your lips dry and a bit chalky from the lime and pat the sides of your mouth. Outside, the dusk sky deepens, lanterns flickering to life in the town's windows. You glimpse smoke curling from tavern chimneys, promising ale that won't sting your throat or leave you tasting like bark. You gather your tools, scraper pegs, patch pieces, and hang them on pegs by the doorway. The workshop's heat seems to recede as you step outside, cool air breathing new life into your limbs. You shake out your sleeves, sending bark chips and lime dust fluttering to the ground. The leather-scented breeze carries distant laughter and the clatter of horse hooves on cobbles. As you walk away, you recall the acidic sting of lime baths, the aroma of oak bark, the taste of chilled rinse water, and the satisfying crack of hides snapping taut on frames. Tomorrow the salt mine or the fish nets might call, but for now, you carry the supple gift of leather on your mind. Each hide you work is a story of transformation from decay to durability, from raw flesh to crafted goods. And in every stitch, scrape, and soak, you find a harsh beauty, a brutality that yields something both useful and enduring. You trudge down the creaking gangway onto the ore deck, salt spray washing over your boots and drenching the hem of your tunic. The morning sun glints off the water, turning every wave into a dazzling mosaic of light. You take your seat among 24 chained rowers, your back to the stern where the captain's voice barks orders. As a galley oarsman, your life is bound to rhythm and exhaustion, arms pumping in unison, heart hammering like a war drum. A mainstream fact, by the 13th century Mediterranean galleys relied primarily on human rowers for propulsion during calm weather, with oar banks stacked 2 or even 3 tiers high in larger vessels. Historians still argue whether triremes outperformed biremes in speed or maneuverability. But on this dawn patrol, your sinews supply every knot of boat speed. You grip the oar's shaft, its wood polished smooth by countless hands, and plant it in the oarlock. The sea smells of brine and fish your breakfast, if you're lucky, will taste of both. You lean forward, muscles coiling like springs, and pull back. Your teammate next to you matches the motion perfectly down heave return. The oar sweeps through the turquoise water, gurgling in your wake. Fringe lore claims some captains painted eyes on their oars to ward off sea monsters, because nothing says monster repellent like a pair of painted blinking lights on a wooden paddle. The deck below you trembles with each synchronized stroke, the hull humming as blades dip and lift, sweat beads at your hairline despite the salty breeze. Joke 1, I always wanted to make waves, but I didn't expect it to be literal. You glance aft, noticing how the galley's streamlined prow cuts through the waves like a knife through alley muck. Compared to the siege camps, this feels positively elegant until you remember your arms will certainly feel none of that elegance by midday. Your row group swings in a steady cadence guided by a drummer banging on a wooden barrel. The drum's hollow thumps echo across the deck, reminding you that hesitation costs lives. If the crew falters, the galley drifts vulnerable under enemy missiles. A fringed tidbit surfaces some captains kept ferocious dogs chained near the drummer to intimidate rowers into maintaining speed, though unchained pups often added chaos when they bit at loose sandals. Historians still argue whether morale-boosting drums outweighed fear tactics in maintaining rower discipline, but you wouldn't trade that barrel's beat for a barking mastiff. You inhale sharply, tasting sea spray and the metallic tang of sweat. Your shoulders burn from the repetitive pull, and your lower back protests with every forward lean. You remember the trench digger's cramped corridor and the sewer cleaner's slime here. At least you're above water, not drowning in refuse. Yet this open deck presents its own hazards, errant waves, blistered hands, and the risk of capsizing if a sudden squall hits. Modern asides flicker through your mind. Imagine a galley safety officer handing you anti-blister cream and flotation devices, but tonight, your boy is the god's goodwill and thick leather gloves. A cry rises from the captain. Avanti, avanti. You dig in deeper oar blades, carving white arcs in the sea. Your arms straighten back, arching, and legs brace against the sliding bench. Joke 2. I always enjoyed sliding into home, but sliding into a rowing bench, not so much. Salt crusts on your forearms, flakes falling into the water like confetti. The oarsman across from you hospitalizes a blister and grits his teeth, but the beat goes on. You pause only when the drummer signals a shift to stern oars, time to set up for a turn. You haul your oar across the deck, the wood thudding against the planks. You sprint forward, heart still pounding, and settle into the new position. The sudden motion jars your spine, reminding you that humans were never meant to be rowing machines. A mainstream fact, Greek and Venetian galleys often changed rowing orders to balance fatigue, rotating fresh men to the bow while others rested midship. Historians still argue whether such rotations actually increased overall speed or merely prolonged agony for all involved. But here, any break is welcome. The sea air turns chill as a breeze picks up and you pull your cloak tighter. A fringe rumor drifts that some rowers sealed their collars with wool dipped in pitch to avoid salt spray burning their necks, a messy, itchy solution that left them smelling like a bonfire. You decide the salt burn is a lesser curse and swivel your head toward the shoreline where a cluster of coastal towers marks your destination. A light joke surfaces. I didn't sign up to paint the town red, only to paddle toward it. You dive back into the rhythm, pull, heave, recover. With each stroke, the galley gains speed, racing the sun as it climbs. Sweat drips into your eyes. You wipe it away on your sleeve, only to have salt sting your fingertips. Your chest heaves, lungs craving fresh air, but delivering only the same humid breath. The drummer's tempo quickens. Battle is near. The captain's voice rings out above the drum beats. Row like the wind, or we drown in their arrows. You unleash every ounce of energy, the oar's handle vibrating in your palm. Waves crash across the bow, drenching you and your comrades in icy spray. The rhythm falters for a heartbeat, and terror spikes through you. A galley stalled at sea is prey. You find the beat again, rowing as if your life depends on it, because it does. You feel the keel slicing through swells, defying the sea's fury. Fringe lore holds that some oarsmen swore by a swig of sacramental wine before action, believing Dionysus granted superhuman strength. You wouldn't mind a sip right now. A mainstream fact cuts through the chaos during naval battles. Galleys used their bronze-sheathed prows rostra to ram enemy vessels, requiring precise speed and coordination from rowers. Historians still argue whether ramming tactics or boarding actions were the primary means of victory. But you know your strokes will determine if you ram or retreat. The oars slam water sprays, and the deck tilts as the vessel veers toward the enemy line. Captain's orders ring out in a dozen languages. You catch only, hold steady. The drummer pounds a war rhythm faster now, a heartbeat doubled. You lean back, pulling until the oarlock creaks, then lean forward to recover. Your muscles tremble, voice silent, letting every fiber drive the blade. A final joke grips your mind. I wanted a sea change, but I didn't expect this literal gale force. Then the shout, hold you lift your oars, clear chest heaving, and watch the prow smash into an opposing galley with thunderous impact. Splinters fly, cries erupt. The momentum holds, and your ship slices free oars lifted like trophies. You taste triumph and salt, each stroke earned. The deck quakes underfoot, the hull groaning in protest and pride. The captain paces the stern, offering quick nods to half-dead rowers. You slip your oar into the rack muscles, trembling but satisfied. The sea around you calms mist rising from the water. You lean on the gunwale, tasting sea spray and triumph. The horizon glows with dawn's promise, and you realize your arms still remember every stroke as if etched in wood. You drop your gaze to the deckhands trembling as you wipe them on your breeches. Your fellow oarsmen slump in their benches, bodies spent, but spirits high. The wind whispers encouragement, and the galley drifts into calmer waters. You breathe deep, hearing the drum's final beat echo in your bones. You step onto the quayside, legs unsteady, and let a deckhand free your chains. Your ankles ache, but the earth feels miraculous after the deck's sway. You lift your cloak, water cascading from its folds back into the sea. A passerby tosses you a cup of water fresh and blessed. You gulp it down, tasting nothing but pure relief. As you walk away from the vessel, oar in hand, every nerve still hums with exertion. The alley cleaner's slime, the salt miner's crystal, and the tannery's fumes all feel less brutal now compared to this pounding ballet at sea. You tuck the oar under your arm head high, knowing you've earned the right to call yourself of the oars. You slip into the castle's bustling courtyard, the clang of steel and shouts of men-at-arms rattle in your ears like a relentless drum. You're the knight's squire, now clad in gambeson sword belt, slung low hands busy with buckle straps and polished steel. Today, you serve Sir Roland, the Red Lion, a man whose temper is as fiery as his heraldic crest. Your duties carry his armor, tend his wounds, and face the first brutal thrusts of battle before he ever draws blood. A mainstream fact in the 12th and 13th centuries, knighthood required years of service as a squire, often beginning at age 14, in which apprentices learned horsemanship, arms, maintenance, and courtly etiquette. Historians still argue whether social mobility was truly possible through knighthood, or whether squires were simply bound by birth to military families. But either way, your present moment hinges on crisp steel and swift reflexes. You kneel beside Sir Roland's mounting wooden block as he ascends into his saddle, armored in mail and a bright red surcoat bearing a roaring lion. You grip his cuirass, hefting its weight, and fasten the leather straps under his arm. The mail clinks a metallic whisper beneath your fingers. Fringe lore suggests that some squires inserted prayer beads between mail rings to ward off misfortune in battle, a practice more superstition than salvation. Yet you slip a tiny rosary into your tunic sleeve, a small comfort against the grim work ahead. Modern asides swarm your thoughts. Imagine squires' care packages delivered weekly full of energy bars and blazons with motivational slogans. But today, your package is a flask of watered wine and a stale biscuit. Joke 1. Nothing says chivalry like sipping vinegar before a fight. You secure Sir Roland's helmet onto his head with a heavy buckle that groans like a siege engine. You check the plume. A bright red ostrich feather stands straight. A crooked plume invites ridicule. The knight's sword rests in a scabbard at his hip. You pat its hilt, polishing it just enough to show respect without blinding onlookers. A mainstream fact, high-quality swords, often pattern-welded, were prized possessions, their blades named and treated almost as comrades in arms. Historians still argue whether swords were more ceremonial than functional in some tournaments. But today, this blade's sharp edge will be tested for real. Fringe rumor whispers that Sir Roland once beheaded his rival with a single stroke mid-joust, his opponent's gasp echoing in the lists. Whether truth or tavern tall tale, it underscores the blade's menace. You rise gathering your own gear, a spear for close support, a dagger for emergencies, and a small leather satchel with bandages soaked in honey and vinegar, a medieval antiseptic mix to staunch bleeding. The courtyard's bustle swells as knights mount chargers, arming up for a skirmish beyond the walls. Horses whinny, hoofbeats thunder, and the smell of sweat metal and manure chokes your throat. Fringe tidbit, some squires reported mixing honey and herbs to create rudimentary vaccines against tetanus. But whether these concoctions did more than sweeten the wounds remains debated. You huff a breath, favor the honey's sweetness over infection's sour sting. Sir Roland gives you a curt nod. You sling his lance across your shoulder, long stout tipped with steel, and fall in step beside him as he leads the charge. A light aside winks in your mind. At least I won't have to sharpen this after. Joke 2. I hope this lance isn't the stick that stirs my soup. The group trots out the castle gates, the portcullis clanking close behind you, like the final act in a grim play. You steady Sir Roland's stirrup as he urges his war horse, a massive destrier named Thunder's Roar, forward. You vault into the saddle behind him, gripping the reins, your spear across your lap. The sun glints off plate buckles and embossed shields as you pass verdant fields dotted with peasants fleeing to safety. A mainstream fact-mounted men-at-arms and their squires form the backbone of medieval armies, their charge capable of breaking infantry lines in a thunderous shock. Historians still argue whether infantry formations like the Flemish pikemen ultimately rendered heavy cavalry obsolete, but today neither peasants nor pikes stand between you and the enemy. Your heart hammers as you spot the opposing force rows of mail-clad footmen and archers assembled near a wooded copse. Banners snap in the breeze and war horns blare like warning calls from hell. Sir Roland grips Thunder's Roar's reins, hoisting his shield high. The squire beside you braces his spear knuckles white. A fringed detail surfaces. Some squires carried small personal flutes to relay orders when drum beats drowned voices. Whether these battle tunes ever caused confusion on the field remains a matter of debate. You grip your spear tighter. No music today, only clashing steel. The charge order sounds. Horses rear lances lower, and you surge forward, mud splattering from hooves. The ground trembles in waves up your spine. You gasp wind and adrenaline swirl as your horse matches Sir Roland's pace. Joke 3. I always wanted to rush into danger, just didn't expect to get there this fast. The enemy linemen plant stakes and raise pikes, their tips glinting. The clash is imminent, inevitable. At 30 paces, Roland's lance meets a shield's rim with a thunderous crack. Splinters fly. A man cries out. You lean forward, spear aimed at the nearest footman's gap in armor, and drive it home. The footman staggers, releasing a gasp as your blade slips between mail rings. His scream echoes in your ears, grim confirmation that you struck true. You wrench the spear-free muscles quaking, then brace as enemy archers let fly a volley aimed at your flank. Arrows buzz past like angry wasps. You drop your spear and draw your dagger, scanning for additional threats. Sir Roland circles back, sword sweeping, in a glittering arc. You duck under the blow's edge, rolling into the mud, and thrust upward. Steel meets steel in a sharp ring. You feel the blade vibrate through your arm. A mainstream fact resurfaces. Medieval swords could penetrate chainmail at close range under optimal conditions, but often relied on thrusting techniques to exploit joints. Historians still argue whether the classic knight versus knight duel ever resembled those stylized tournament reenactments, or was a brutal scramble for survival. You're living the latter. A footman lunges, halberd raised high. You parry with your dagger twisting to avoid the strike's full force. Your elbow buckles. Pain flares. Adrenaline dulls it enough to keep fighting. You slip a foot under the man's shield and drive your dagger home in a gap beneath his arm. Another scream. Your ears ring. Mud and blood mingle on your blade. You stagger back, blade in hand, lungs burning. Sir Roland appears, sword dripping crimson, and looms over you. He claps a gauntleted hand on your shoulder, approval mixed with relief. You nod, gasping, then heft your dagger, ready for more. The skirmish turns, footmen, retreat cavalry, press the advantage. You ride in circles, shielding your knight from stray blows and patching his bleeding brow with vinegar-soaked cloth. Musket no, just searing pain. A fringe rumor drifts, squires sometimes carried a hidden whetstone to sharpen daggers mid-fight. But you've yet to find the courage to use it under arrow fire. You press on, adrenaline carrying you past fatigue. Soon the enemy breaks ranks, fleeing toward their carts. Sir Roland lifts his sword in triumph. You join the cheer. A mainstream fact, victorious squires and knights often received ransoms from captured nobles, supplementing meager pay. Historians still argue whether this system favored the wealthy rich more than the fighting man. But today, your knight pockets a tidy sum. You help him collect the fallen lance, noting its shattered tip-proof of a fight well met. As the courtyard fills with wounded and dead, you dismount, legs quivering. You kneel beside Sir Roland and offer him your flask of spiced mead, a reward for his valor and yours. You bandage his wound, each fold of cloth a promise of his survival. The sun dips low, painting the battlefield in blood-red light. Horses nick at haymen, tend to horses, and you breathe deep, tasting sweat, blood, and the heady scent of victory. You return Sir Roland's armor to the block, each piece clinking into place. He removes his helm. Sweat and blood streak his face. He nods at you, a rare gesture of pride. You bow your head, feeling exhaustion crash into you like a wave. Tomorrow, you'll polish armor for a tournament or mend nets for a fishing trip. But tonight, you've proven your mettle. You gather your gear, sword, dagger, makeshift medical satchel, and walk from the courtyard, each step a triumph over fear. The battle's echoes fade behind you, replaced by distant church bells and the soft murmur of camp followers. Your bones ache, your heart races, and your hands still shake. But you stand taller now, a squire tested in the brutal forge of battle, surviving by blade, by blood, and by stubborn will. You shoulder a battered pickaxe at dawn's first light, the handle still warm from last night's forge repairs. The morning air tastes of dew and hope's delicate compared to the bitter tang of sweat and dust that will coat your lungs by day's end. You step onto the half-finished stretch of road where neat rows of stones sit like waiting chess pieces, awaiting your hammer's judgment. As a medieval road builder, you carve lifelines across muddy plains, forging pathways that armies, merchants, and pilgrims will tread if you survive the toil first. A mainstream fact from the Roman era, into the Middle Ages well-engineered roads, often layered with gravel, sand, and large stones, facilitated trade and military movement. By the 10th century, many old Roman routes lay in ruin, prompting local lords to commission repairs or new king's roads. Historians still argue whether centralized royal edicts or local guilds maintained roads more effectively. But on this stretch, your sweat keeps traffic moving. You kneel beside a granite slab half buried in compacted earth, drawing a line with chalk, an innovation borrowed from masons. You mark where the stone's beveled edge will fit next to its neighbors. Fringe lore whispers that master road builders carried talismans, tiny carved boots, to bless each slab's wear resistance. Whether these charms prevented potholes or merely offered psychological comfort goes unrecorded. You pocket a wooden boot charm, smoothing its curves before setting the tool aside. Your hammer, a stout mallet with an iron head, rises and falls in a practiced arc, chiseling away rough edges until the stone nestles flush with its companions. Each strike echoes across the open field like distant thunderdust plumes rising to meet the sky. You taste grit on your tongue, the road's particles dancing in your mouth. Joke 1. I always thought my milestones would be pages in a book, not slabs under passing carts. Behind you, fellow laborers haul wheelbarrows of crushed gravel, a coarse mixture of flinty chippings, pouring it into the joint between slabs. You rake the gravel, coaxing it into every crevice, then tamp it down with a heavy iron tamper, sending vibrations up your arms. The gravel crunches into place, locking stones like puzzle pieces in a giant, muddy jigsaw. A mainstream fact surfaces proper road building, required crowns, slight rises in the center to shed rainwater into ditches at the sides, reducing erosion. Historians still argue whether medieval road crews understood fluid dynamics or simply followed inherited rules of thumb. But the crowned arch here promises fewer puddles. You stand and stretch, feeling the road's gentle slope beneath your boots. The morning sun warms your back, and already you can smell cooking fires from nearby cottages. Coffee hasn't arrived yet to rescue your senses. Fringe tidbits, some road crews carried flasks of mead mixed with herbs to stave off exhaustion, believing licorice root strengthened their backs. Whether the concoction did more than sweeten their aches is, as always, debatable. You uncork a flask, sip the heady brew, and grimace as its sweetness slides across your tongue like spiked syrup. Joke 2. Who knew highway maintenance came with the side of sugar rush? A cart rattles by on the newly laid stones, oxen straining against harnesses. You pause, marveling at how smoothly the wheels glide over granite, where yesterday mud swallowed them knee-deep. Travelers exchange waves, tipping hats in thanks, though you wonder if they truly appreciate the brutal work beneath their wheels. A mainstream fact insists that tolls were often collected from travelers to fund further repairs, making road builders scarcely popular with merchants. Historians still argue whether toll rates stifled commerce or kept roads passable, but today you relish every cart's silent pat of approval. Your pickaxe now joins the hammer, breaking larger stones into workable sizes. You swing its pick end into a rough boulder, then twist to chip off fragments, sending shards like rock-carved confetti at your feet. The rock resists each strike, chipping away at both stone and resolve. A modern aside drifts imagine OSHA handing you a hard hat and ear protection before letting you assault boulders. But in this era, your only shield is grit and gloves. You laugh at yourself. After all, you're the rock star of the road. Joke 3, I guess you could say I'm crushing it. By midday, the sun blazes overhead and sweat pours down your face in rivulets. You pause under a makeshift canopy woven from linen sacks. Drink cold water laced with a pinch of salt and snack on coarse bread and cheese. The cheese's rind tastes of chalk, but hunger makes even that divine. Fringe lore suggests road builders sometimes tipped gravel with sanded oils to mask dust's dryness. You dab a bit of lavender oil behind your ears. If nothing else, it'll make you smell better at night. Back at your bench, you set another slab checking alignment with a mason's line. The string hums with tension. You tweak the stone until no light seeps beneath its edge. The road surface grows under your hands, a ribbon connecting village to village, fortress to forest. A mainstream fact emerges: well-maintained roads reduce journey times dramatically. What once took days could be cut to hours, boosting trade and communication. Historians still argue whether maintenance lagged behind construction, but here, you're the linchpin holding the route together. As shadows lengthen, you fit the final stone of this section. You tap it gently. The ring echoes pure and true, a resonant bell proclaiming completion. You back away, admire the stretch of stones curving across fields, their smooth surface reflecting the setting sun in dusky pinks. The crown sheds water to ditches lined with grass, no puddles in sight. You sheath your tools, shoulders heaving, but pride swelling. You hoist your pickaxe and hammer over your shoulder and begin the trek back to camp. Each step crunches on the newly laid stones a satisfying chorus. You pass travelers now strolling, inspecting the road as if awed by some grand miracle. You nod, a silent acknowledgement of shared effort. Tomorrow, you'll move on to carve another section, perhaps through harder bedrock or marshy valleys. But tonight, you walk on perfection you helped create. The campfire's smoke curls in the dusk as you enter the quarters. Fellow road builders lounge, their clothes dusty and worn faces lit by flames. You settle by the fire, unstrap your tools, and let muscles relax. The road awaits more stones, more sweat, more days like this. But for now, you breathe deep, tasting dust and success in equal measure. You emerge onto the rolling fields at dawn, the early light gilding dewy grass, and the lingering fog clinging to low stone walls. Your boots sink into soft earth, but you barely notice the weight of your heavy leather satchel anchors you more than the mud. As a battlefield body collector, you're tasked with gathering corpses for burial quotas and harvesting prized body parts for bounty. Today, your grim rounds begin where swords have sung their final dirge, and shields lie shattered in the blood-soaked soil. A mainstream fact: during the 100 Years' War and other medieval conflicts, local lords mandated that bodies be cleared promptly to prevent disease and restore farmland, often paying collectors by the corpse or by the pound of recovered limbs. Historians still argue whether these policies were driven more by public health concerns or by the lure of cheap labor. But either way, your income depends on counting the fallen. You trudge toward the war-torn meadow where the clash ended hours ago. The stench of iron and rotting flesh hangs thickly in acrid perfume that sears your nostrils. You steady your breath, raising a cloth to your mouth tasting vinegar and earth. Fringe lore claims some body collectors wore belts studded with wolf teeth to ward off restless spirits, believing the feral charms kept the dead from clawing their way free. Whether bones ever rattled in response remains an unverified whisper among coffin makers and grave diggers. You step over a shattered shield rim tangled in entrails, heart thumping. You kneel beside a fallen infantryman, his armor perforated by arrows. You knead his gauntleted hand gently to confirm rigor mortis, then swing into work. With gloves thick as leather mitts, you sever the man's head with a curved saw, ancient and unwieldy its blade, nicked from countless uses. The snap of bone yields a hollow echo across the field. Joke 1. Talk about a clean break, he really hit his head on a low branch. You place the head into a wicker basket lined with straw. These fetch better coin from surgeons and anatomists. Nearby, you spot a mounted knight's discarded gauntlets glinting in the dawn. You strip them for salvage, knowing mail and plate sell well at Smith's stalls. A mainstream fact, battlefield scavengers often recovered weapons and armor from the dead, supplying towns with a steady stream of repairs and new gear. Historians still argue whether scavenging bordered on piracy or simply reflected practical resourcefulness in lean times. As you rise, satchel heavy and shoulders stooped, you notice movement beyond a row of corpses. A wounded man feigns death. His ragged gasp catches you off guard. You freeze, heart pounding, and he clutches at your ankle, eyes wide with desperation. You grip your dagger poised to defend a stolen life, but he croaks his plea. Spare me for ransom. A fringe tidbit dances in your mind. Rumor says some collectors delivered living bodies to captors for hefty ransom fees, turning battlefield picks into human auctions. Whether lords sanction such trades or condemn them as war crimes remains hotly debated. You lower your blade, adrenaline still hammering. You tie the man's wrists with a strip of cloth and hoist him onto your back, wounded weight burning your arms. You sling him beside a corpse in your cart, tossing a burlap cloth over to spare him the neighbor's worst fate. Modern asides flicker. Imagine Red Cross negotiations before you pocket a ransom. Fill out Form 20-FB6 for living salvage. Joke 2. I'm all for recycling, but I didn't sign up for human upcycling. Back at the cart, you unload the dead and injured into separate piles. You count heads 34 by your reckoning, and bag collected limbs, fingers, ears, even a nose prized for fur-trimmed masks. You tally each item on a stained parchment. A mainstream fact surfaces in some regions body part bounties paid more for severed hands, ears, and feet believed useful in medicinal sympathy potions. Historians still argue whether these gruesome potions achieved any real cures or merely nourished the charlatans' coffers. Your satchel now bulges. You shoulder it cart pushed by a pair of pressed peasants paid with grudging coin. They groan beneath the weight, but follow your lead. You stride toward the burial trench, an open pit lined with quicklime. The pungent dust rises as you dump the bodies, each thud a grim punctuation. You top the heap with lime, scattering it like frost before raking the soil over. A fringe whisper suggests that lime's skeletal bleaching allowed gravediggers to spot survivors beneath the mound, an ironic concession to botched burials. Whether it actually saved anyone or simply hid the evidence remains debated. You pause at the pit's edge, gazing down at the nameless beneath the earth. The rising sun warms your back, and you inhale deeply, tasting victory over decay. Joke 3, they say death comes to all, but I'm the one who makes sure it stays buried. You turn to inspect the injured bound and waiting for ransom riders. The wounded man groans, eyes flickering with relief. Your mercy may net a tidy coin. A mainstream fact reminds you that battlefield clearance operations often required clergy to bless the trenches lest the unshriven souls wander. Historians still argue whether priests truly followed collectors into the field or recited prayers from a safe distance. You tuck a small crucifix into the wounded man's hand, both to bless him and perhaps to encourage faster recovery for ransom. As you mount your cart for the journey back to town, peasants guiding from behind you survey the land, a tapestry of sacrificed warriors, repurposed armor, and fresh graves. Each step you take turns history's wheel, from the blood-soaked ground to communal memory. Fringe lore promises that collectors who respect the dead earn better burial wages, while those who mock the fallen risk hauntings. You pat the satchel's side, promising reverence, if not rest. You trudge along the rough track cartwheels, sinking into ruts. The stench clings anew, and you taste lime and iron on your tongue. Your bones ache, and your mind roils with memories of groans and hollow skull echoes. Yet each corpse you carry serves both community health and your purse. A mainstream fact surfaces efficient body collections, curtailed plague outbreaks, and improved crop yields on former battlefields. Historians still argue whether the health benefits outweighed the moral compromises. You crest a hill, the town rising ahead like a fortress of normal life. Skies blaze with afternoon sun as you approach the gates. The guards tally your hall body's heads parts and nod. You accept coins and a final blessing from a friar who drapes a stole over the cart's edge. You catch his whispered prayer blessing, both you and the dead. You lower your head in silent respect. As you step inside the walls, the sounds of church bells and marketplace chatter wash over you, jolting you back to life's mundane rhythms. The satchel's weight eases as you unload pegs for the severed armor baskets of heads, for the surgeons, the living, for the ransom brokers. You watch each group disperse some hands, slide coins into your palm. Others drag bodies to mortuary carts. You straighten muscles, trembling, and rub your neck. Tomorrow, you might return as a deep-sea fisherman or a dry stone wall builder. But tonight, you rest in a bed unsoiled by battlefields. You scrub at your satchel straps, removing dried blood and lime, then hang it to dry. You remove your gloves' hands quivering and trace a finger along the satchel's worn leather, an object as scarred as your memories. You exhale, tasting vinegar lime and relief. The body collector's work is brutal, thankless, and oddly sacred, a bridge between life and death. You lower your head, offering a silent prayer for each soul you carried. Then you turn toward the tavern, ready for ale, for stories, and for the comfort of warm hearths and living laughter. You stand at the prow of the fishing longboat as dawn bleeds into the gray horizon, the ship pitching beneath your boots like a restless beast. Salty spray lashes your face, stinging your eyes and plastering your hair to your forehead. You grip the thick rope of the main net, its threads heavy with sea water and the promise of the day's catch. Today, you brave the raging waves as a deep-sea fisherman, hauling nets bursting with slippery, struggling fish from the ocean's cold depths. A mainstream fact, medieval North Atlantic fishers often ventured as far as the Grand Banks, where abundant cod stocks supported entire coastal economies and supplied church-mandated Lenten fasts. These journeys could last weeks at a time, with crews living off hardtack, salted pork, and fresh fish. Historians still argue whether fishing fleets or trade convoys had a greater impact on medieval maritime technology. But for now, your knuckles whiten with strain as you and your crew wrestle the net's swell. You lean back against the net's pull muscles coiling like springs and dig your heels into the deck's wet planks. The net's mesh is thick with seaweed and stunned fish, herring, mackerel, cod, each slick body glinting silver in the dawn light. Fringe lore claims that some fishermen tied small bells to their nets so the noise would scare smaller fish into the open, corralling them into the mesh. Whether the bells worked or simply clanged annoyingly at every wave remains hotly debated among salty old-timers. You tug again, heave again, and the deck tilts beneath you. A modern world aside flickers through your mind. Imagine OSHA insisting on winches and hydraulic lifts to haul nets complete with no manual lifting signs, but you wouldn't trade the raw struggle for anything mechanical. Joke 1. If my back survives this, I'll be the only person granted a skeleton key to the chiropractor's door. Your breath comes in ragged bursts, misting in the cool air. The deck groans, timbers twisting as the boat lists under the net's weight. You and 3 crewmates wrap armbands against your forearms to prevent rope burn. The rope burns anyway, friction catching on calloused skin. You taste salt on your lips, cold and biting, and swallow. A fringe tidbit rumor among fishermen holds that dipping a strip of sheep's wool in lamp oil and wrapping it around the wrist soothed the rope burn, though the resulting smell reportedly rivaled the stench of guano. You dismiss the idea. Wool oil sounds as appealing as eating soggy hay. A mainstream fact surfaces fishing crews were often organized in kinship groups or guild-like associations, pooling risk and profit. A bountiful haul could feed a village for days and secure your reputation at the nearest tavern. Historians still argue whether medieval fishing economies were predominantly communal or dominated by wealthy ship owners, but tonight, your coin depends on every shimmering fish in that net. You lean forward, using your body weight to shift the net over a wooden rail called the cod block. Fish cascade in a slipper avalanche onto the deck fins, flapping scales sheening in the rising sun. You grab a bucket and begin sorting cod to one side, herring to another, stray seaweed tossed overboard. You feel fish scales cling to your gloves and slide between your fingers like living confetti. Joke 2. I always wanted to make a splash at parties, but this is ridiculous. The deck thrums with activity. Crewmates gut, their knives flashing in the dim light. A barrel of brine sloshes as salted fish are packed for shore. Buckets of guts and discarded heads spill over the gunwale. The sea's breath swirls around you, carrying gull cries that sound like the world's most persistent alarm clock. A fringe footnote. Some fishermen claimed the brine of salted cod made the best leathered tanners soak when supplies ran low, yet treating hides with fish guts was said to impart an oceanic aroma that sold poorly. You snort at the idea of sea-scented boots. The waves grow larger, rising like rolling hills, and you steady yourself against the rail. A mainstream fact reminds you storms at sea could appear suddenly with gale-force winds and towering swells that capsize ships. Maritime sagas recount crews bribing sea gods with offerings of first catch, desperate rituals to survive tempests. Historians still argue whether such superstitions stemmed from genuine faith or crude attempts to explain unpredictable weather. But you clutch a small wooden carving of St. Peter, hanging from your neck, a talisman carved by your father. You finger it as the boat lurches violently. A wave crashes across the deck, sending fish and sweat flying in a briny deluge. You wipe sea spray from your eyes and laugh half in relief, half in disbelief at your own survival. Joke 3. Well, that's one way to clean the deck, high-pressure rinse included. You grab the next section of net, your hands slippery but determined, and begin pulling again. Each heave combines with the deck's creak and the ocean's roar into a cacophonous symphony. You feel a stab of fear, but also exhilaration as you fight the living sea and its writhing bounty. Your crewmates grunt in unison, a wordless chorus of muscle and salt. You know you're part of something ancient, something that shapes coastlines and communities alike. Slowly, methodically, the net empties. Last fish slid away, and the heavy mesh loops slack around your waist. You kick free a final tangle of seaweed water, dripping onto the wood. The deck is littered with fish, silver and green, awaiting final cleaning. You step back, chest heaving, and survey the haul buckets piled high, barrels half full, and promise in every glinting scale. The captain's horn echoes across the sea, the signal to return to harbor. You smile, knuckles sore, heart pounding, and join your fellow fishermen in hauling the net sections below deck for mending. The promise of warm ale and a dry berth calls louder than any seagull's screech. Behind you, the ocean stretches in endless gray, its depths teeming with life you've only begun to plumb. You wipe your hands on a rag-tasting fish oils and salt and catch your reflection in a polished bucket of brine, wind-tousled hair, a grin smeared with scales. You nod to yourself. You survived another haul, another storm, another endless battle with the sea. Historians still argue whether medieval fishers risked more lives hauling nets or raking in gold from the Gulf. But tonight, your bones testify to both. You descend below to help stow the dried nets the boats pitch, turning gentle at last. And as the longshore lights of harbor come into view, your weary soul lifts tomorrow. You'll face the sea again. But for now, you carry the ocean's bounty and the salt of survival in every ache and muscle. Now, as the waves settle into a gentle lull and the deck beneath you feels less like a living creature and more like a solid cradle, let your mind drift with the tide. You lean against the gunwale warmth seeping back into your bones, imagining the long voyage of your catch from ocean depths to market stalls, from the brine on your gloves to the sizzling pan awaiting those silver fillets. The rhythm of the sea becomes a soft heartbeat, lulling your senses into calm repose. Feel the salt spray's memory fade into the cool night air, replaced by the soft glow of lanterns swaying at the quayside. Let each breath carry away the sting of seawater and the ache of muscles earned in relentless struggle. Each inhale a whisper of safety, each exhale a farewell to the day's battles, whether man versus blade, blood, dirt flame, or ocean. Rest now in the knowledge that you have faced the most brutal tasks the medieval world could muster and lived to tell the tale. The wind that once bit at your cheeks now tucks you in a gentle companion on this voyage to sleep. The images of axes, racks, shovels, leeches, stones, trenches, rat sewers, salt hides, oars, armor, roads, corpses, and nets fade like distant horizons, leaving only the quiet promise of tomorrow's dawn. So close your eyes, let the soft murmur of waves cradle you, and breathe into the calm. May the memories of hardship melt away, replaced by warm blankets and hearthside comforts. Good night and sweet dreams. End of script. Sweet dreams.